I'm Eleanor, 58 years old, and I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like when I buried my husband 3 years ago. I was wrong. When my daughter Jessica and her family moved in with me after losing their house 6 months ago, I welcomed them with open arms. Every Tuesday, we'd gather around my dining room table for dinner, just like when she was little. It was our sacred tradition. But last Tuesday evening, as I served the pot roast I'd spent all day preparing, 3 simple words from Jessica's mouth would shatter my world more completely than death ever could. Before we dive into what happened, that changed everything forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story will show you just how quickly love can turn into the deepest betrayal, and how sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for are the ones who hurt us most. You know, people always say that becoming a widow changes you, but nobody tells you how it changes the way you love. When Robert died 3 years ago after battling cancer for 18 months, I thought my heart had room for only grief. But then Jessica called me 6 months ago, her voice breaking, as she explained how Mark had lost his job at the manufacturing plant, how they'd fallen behind on their mortgage, how the bank was foreclosing on their little house across town. I didn't hesitate for even a second. "Pack your things and come home." I told her the same words I'd said when she scraped her knee at age 7, or when Tommy Henderson broke her heart in high school. My 4-bedroom house had been echoing with loneliness since Robert's passing anyway. Having my daughter, her husband Mark, and my precious grandchildren Emma and Tyler fill those empty rooms felt like the closest thing to healing I'd experienced in years. Robert and I had been married for 32 years. We'd built our life together in this house on Maple Street, watching Jessica grow up in the bedroom upstairs that now belonged to 8-year-old Emma. The walls held 30 years of Christmas mornings, birthday parties, and family dinners. When Robert took his last breath in our bedroom holding my hand while the April rain tapped against the windows, I thought those walls would never hear laughter again. But children have a way of bringing life back to empty spaces. Tyler, just 5 years old with Robert's same mischievous smile, would race his toy cars down the hallway where his grandfather once walked. Emma, mature beyond her 8 years, would sit at Robert's old desk doing homework, her tongue poking out in concentration, just like Jessica used to do. Watching them breathe life back into our home felt like Robert's final gift to me. I threw myself into caring for them with the same devotion I'd given Robert during his illness. Every morning at 6:30, I'd start the coffee and begin preparing breakfast for 5 people instead of 1. I'd pack lunch boxes, help with homework, and make sure everyone had clean clothes and full bellies. The grocery bills that used to run me $60 a week now stretched to over $200, but I didn't mind. Robert's life insurance had left me comfortable enough, and what good was money if I couldn't use it to care for the people I loved most? Mark had initially been so grateful, almost embarrassingly so. He'd hug me after dinner and call me the best mother-in-law a man could ask for. He'd help with dishes and yard work, always asking permission before using anything in the house. "Eleanor, you're an angel," he'd say, and I'd blush and tell him we were family. That family takes care of each other. Those first few weeks felt like a second chance at the motherhood I'd missed when Jessica left home 15 years ago. I loved hearing their voices fill the house. Loved having someone to cook for again. Loved being needed. The utility bills doubled with 4 extra people, but I paid them without complaint. When Emma needed new school supplies or Tyler outgrew his sneakers, I'd quietly handle it, slipping Jessica the money, or sometimes just showing up with what they needed. But happiness, I've learned, can be as fragile as morning frost. By the 2nd month, subtle changes began creeping into our daily rhythm, like shadows stretching across a sunny day. It started with small things that I told myself meant nothing. Mark would leave his coffee cup on the counter instead of putting it in the dishwasher. He'd track mud through the kitchen without wiping his feet, something that would have mortified him during those first grateful weeks. The job search that had begun with such determination started showing cracks of frustration. Mark would spend hours at my computer clicking through job sites with increasingly aggressive muttering. "They want 5 years' experience for an entry-level position," he'd complain, his voice carrying through the house. "The whole system is rigged against regular guys like me." I understood his frustration, truly, I did. At 51, Mark faced the cruel reality that many men his age discovered too late. The manufacturing jobs that had sustained our town for generations were disappearing, replaced by positions requiring computer skills he'd never needed in 20 years of factory work. But understanding his struggle didn't make it easier to watch him take his anger out on the people trying to help him. Jessica caught in the middle like a rope in a tug-of-war. I'd see her shoulders tense when Mark's voice rose during his daily rants about potential employers. She'd give me apologetic looks when he'd monopolize dinner conversation with complaints about interview processes or hiring managers who wouldn't give a real man a chance. The light that had returned to her eyes when they first moved in began dimming again. The house itself started feeling different. Mark's presence, once grateful and accommodating, became something heavier. He'd rearrange furniture without asking, claiming the living room layout was inefficient. He'd invite his drinking buddy Carl over to watch football games, and they'd leave beer bottles scattered around my coffee table, their loud commentary drowning out the peaceful evenings I'd once treasured. "Your mother likes having us here," he'd tell Jessica when she'd gently suggest they clean up after themselves. "She's been lonely since your dad died. We're doing her a favor by keeping her company." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to make me question my own feelings. Was I being ungrateful for noticing these changes? Should I just be thankful not to be alone? But it was the way he started talking about my house that really began to bother me. "We should really update this kitchen," he'd say, gesturing around the room where Robert and I had shared 30 years of meals. "These appliances are ancient, and this wallpaper is from the 1980s. He wasn't wrong about the age of things, but this was still my home filled with memories he couldn't understand or appreciate. The grocery bills continued climbing as Mark developed expensive tastes for premium coffee and imported beer. The utility costs soared as he insisted on keeping the thermostat at 78 degrees year-round, claiming his old factory injury made him sensitive to temperature changes. When I gently mentioned the rising expenses, Jessica would apologize profusely, and Mark would grunt something about getting a job soon and paying me back double. The third month brought a shift I couldn't ignore anymore. Mark's job interviews, which had started with such promise, began ending in angry phone calls home. They hired some college kid instead. He'd rage pacing around my kitchen, probably paying him half what they'd have to pay me. "These companies don't want experience anymore. They want cheap labor they can manipulate." I tried to help by offering suggestions from my own work experience. Before marrying Robert, I'd spent 8 years as an administrative assistant at the county courthouse, working my way up from filing clerk to managing the entire office. I knew about resumes, interview skills, and workplace politics. But every time I'd gently offer advice, Mark would cut me off with increasing irritation. "Eleanor, no offense, but the job market has changed a lot since the 1970s. He'd say, his tone suggesting my input was not just unwelcome, but laughably outdated. "What worked for secretaries back then doesn't apply to real careers today." The dismissiveness in his voice made my cheeks burn, but I'd swallow my hurt and change the subject. Jessica's pregnancy announcement should have been a joyful moment. I was sitting in my favorite recliner, the one Robert had bought me for Mother's Day 5 years ago, when she perched on the arm and took my hands in hers. "Mom, we're expecting again," she said softly, her eyes searching my face for a reaction. My first emotion was pure joy. Another grandchild to spoil and love. But the practical part of my brain, the part that had been balancing a household budget for 40 years, immediately started calculating. 3 children meant higher grocery bills, more utility usage, less space in a house already feeling crowded. It meant Jessica would need to stay home longer, making Mark's job search even more critical. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug that smelled like her familiar vanilla perfume. "When are you due?" March," she whispered, and I could hear both excitement and worry in her voice. "Mark's really stressed about the timing with the job situation and all." That evening's dinner conversation centered around the pregnancy news. Mark's reaction was telling. Instead of celebration, he launched into a monologue about the unfairness of bringing a child into such an uncertain situation. "If these companies would just give a guy a fair shot," he muttered, stabbing his mashed potatoes with unnecessary force. "A man should be able to provide for his growing family." I watched Emma and Tyler exchange confused glances across the table. At 8 and 5, they couldn't understand the adult tension crackling through the dining room, but they could sense it. Emma had started having nightmares again, the same ones she'd had during her parents' worst financial struggles before moving in with me. Tyler had become clingy, refusing to let me out of his sight when I went to the grocery store or bank. The weight of supporting 5 people was beginning to wear on me, though I tried not to let it show. Robert's life insurance money, which had seemed like such a generous cushion 3 years ago, was steadily shrinking under the pressure of doubling every household expense. The property taxes on the house were due soon, along with the annual insurance premium and a roof repair that couldn't wait much longer. But more than the financial pressure, it was the atmosphere of constant tension that was exhausting me. Every meal felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing what comment might trigger one of Mark's explosive rants about the economy, employers, or the general unfairness of life. Jessica had started eating quickly and excusing herself to help the children with baths, leaving me alone at the table with a man whose gratitude had curdled into resentment. The week leading up to that devastating Tuesday dinner felt like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, knowing the thunder was coming, but powerless to stop it. Mark had 3 job interviews that week, each one raising my hopes that maybe finally things would turn around for all of us. Each interview ended in disappointment that seemed to compound his anger rather than motivate him to try harder. Monday's interview at the hardware store ended with Mark storming through my front door, his face red with indignation. "They wanted to start me at $12 an hour," he announced, as if this was a personal insult. "I made 23 at the plant. These people think I'm desperate enough to take whatever scraps they throw me." Tuesday's interview at a local office supply company lasted exactly 15 minutes. "The manager was younger than Jessica," Mark complained, pacing around my living room while I tried to watch my afternoon talk show. "Some little girl fresh out of college asking me about my computer skills. I've been working since before she was born, but apparently that doesn't matter anymore." Wednesday brought the most promising opportunity, an assistant manager position at a furniture warehouse. Mark spent an hour getting ready, borrowing Robert's good tie and asking Jessica to iron his best shirt. I allowed myself to hope this might be the breakthrough we all needed. When he returned 2 hours later with sagging shoulders and a defeated expression, I knew before he spoke that it hadn't gone well. "They said I was overqualified," he said, slumping into Robert's favorite chair without asking. "Said they were worried I'd leave as soon as something better came along. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Too experienced for some jobs, not qualified enough for others." By Thursday, Mark had given up pretending to look for work. He spent the day on my couch drinking beer and watching cable news programs that seemed designed to fuel his anger about everything wrong with the world. When Jessica suggested he might try broadening his search to include temporary or part-time work, he exploded. "I'm not flipping burgers or stocking shelves," he shouted loud enough to make Tyler cry upstairs where he was supposed to be napping. "I'm a skilled worker with 20 years of experience. I shouldn't have to settle for teenager jobs just because this economy is designed to screw over middle-aged men." Friday brought a new low point. I came home from my weekly grocery shopping trip to find Mark had invited 3 of his unemployed friends over for what he called a strategy session, but looked more like a drinking party. They'd rearranged my living room furniture, turned the television volume up so high the neighbors would complain, and left empty beer bottles and food containers scattered across every surface. "Eleanor," Mark called when he heard me come in, his voice carrying the artificial loudness of someone who'd been drinking since noon. "Come meet the guys.
We're forming a support group for men who've been screwed over by corporate America.
I smiled politely and excused myself to the kitchen, where I found they'd raided my refrigerator and consumed most of the groceries I'd just spent $200 replacing. The lunch meat I'd bought for the children's school sandwiches was gone, along with the orange juice Emma loved and the yogurt cups that were Tyler's favorite snack. That evening, after Mark's friends finally left, Jessica found me sitting at the kitchen table staring at my grocery receipt. "Mom, I'm so sorry about today," she said, her voice small and tired. "Mark's just frustrated. He doesn't mean to be inconsiderate." But that was the problem. He did mean to be inconsiderate, or at least he no longer cared enough to try not to be. The grateful, humble man who'd hugged me and called me an angel had been replaced by someone who saw my generosity as his due, my home as his domain, my resources as his to distribute to whoever